Hi friends, I'm Scot Giles and welcome to PowerTalk, my podcast here on Facebook Live and YouTube. I cover topics related to hypno-coaching, spirituality, and the hypnotic arts and sciences generally. If you'd like to know more about my professional work, check out my website, which I'll tag at the end of this video. Today I want to talk about a theme from one of the most famous books in the entire productivity headspace, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Specifically, habit number 7, sharpen the saw. Imagine you're going for a walk in the forest, Covey says, and you come upon a man sawing down a tree. And the man's working very hard, but not getting very far. What are you doing, you ask. I'm sawing down a tree, he says. How long have you been at it, you ask. 2 or 3 hours so far, he says, sweat dripping from his chin. Your saw looks dull, you say. Why don't you take a break and sharpen it? I can't. I'm too busy sawing, is his reply. The subtitle for this section is Seek Continuous Improvement and Renewal, Professionally and Personally. The basic idea is that you need to avoid becoming so busy that you neglect yourself and thereby allow your health, mood, abilities, or energy to decline. And it's really easy to make this mistake. I know in my own life, when I get busy, the first thing I'm tempted to let go of is my self-care. Years ago, when I was working in a parish setting, I made this mistake and seriously injured my health. Now, believe it or not, work in a parish church is difficult. There's always more work that people expect that you can accomplish than there's time or money to accomplish. And typically what happens is there's pressure applied to the staff to keep on doing more and more. Well, what happened to me is my primary care physician, who had been my doctor for many, many years, was a fantastic physician. Thanks, Steve, if you're watching this. He came into the exam room one day holding the printout from my electrocardiogram and said, Scott, my best guess is you're about a year away from your first heart attack unless you make some changes. Talk about a wake-up call, and bear in mind that heart disease is something that's taken the lives of most of the men in my family. The doctor then began to run a list of self-care ideas, and I had to respond that I wasn't doing any of them. I worked from morning to late night. Seriously, board meetings sometimes go beyond midnight. Even though I'm a serious foodie, I was in fact living on fast food from the 7-Eleven down the road because I would sometimes have only 15 minutes for dinner between committee meetings. And I'm not unique. This sort of thing is all too common among parish ministers, and as a result, they all tend to be overweight, overstressed, and have troubled relationships. But ministers are not unique about this. A lot of people in our society today are overworked, overstressed, and neglectful of self-care. Maybe even you. People realizing this during the pandemic when they had more time on their hands are often now opting out of this kind of employment because they're saying it just isn't worth it. And this is coming to be called the Great Resignation. You know, what happens is you try to set reasonable limits only to discover that everyone thinks they should be an exception to those limits. Some time management consultants call this working in the modern environment like trying to cross a river infested by piranhas. Now, a piranha is a carnivorous and aggressive fish in the Amazon. It's relatively small, but they travel in groups. They only take a little bite, but there are a lot of them, and pretty soon there's nothing left of you but a blood stain in the water when you tried to cross that infested river. Well, trying to set limits with people who don't want you to set limits is just like that. You can try, saying you need to focus and marshal your resources and protect your health, but they don't believe you because they only want a little bite out of your time. But there are often so many of such people that, like the piranha, they eat all your time alive if you're not careful. Now, what's helped me with this, and I do think I've achieved some success in being able to keep my personal saw sharp. What's helped me is I began to collect bits of wisdom that encourage me to push back against efforts to get me to overfunction. A lot of people like myself who are writers or wordsmiths will keep something called a commonplace book. That's a place where you collect quotes and ideas for future use. Well, I set up a whole section for quotes about the importance of self-care and keeping the personal saw sharp. When Stephen Covey wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, what he realized is that effective people don't leave self-care to chance. They're not like the guy trying to cut down a tree with a dull saw. Instead, they take a break, they get their tools in shape for the task at hand. And for most of us, our primary tool is our mind, both our intelligence and our emotions. And to keep that in good shape, we have to pay attention to our stress level, to our mood, to our physical selves. Otherwise, what happens is everything will take longer and will not get done well because we're overstressed, overworked, trying to cut down a metaphorical tree with a dull saw. As someone once said in my hearing, you don't have time to not take care of yourself. Well, the great theologian Martin Luther said something similar. He said, I have so much to do today, I cannot accomplish it if I spend less than 3 hours in prayer. What he meant by that is that he had discovered that he needed internal time to keep his mind in order. And if he didn't give himself that time, he would be so much less productive than if he had just taken the time for the self-care and accomplished more as a result. Right on. Abraham Lincoln is reported to have said something similar. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, he said, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. I have a colleague, Victoria M. Gallagher, who wrote a book called Practical Law of Attraction. Now, I'm not personally convinced that the law of attraction, that you tend to attract what you focus on, is as powerful as some think, although I'd be among the first to say there is something to it. But in her book, Victoria makes a point that really resonated with me, and it's in her discussion on integrity. Gallagher points out that some people say they believe that they attract what they focus on, but when you look at their lives, they're not actually doing what they say with regard to their own lives. They're not focusing on the things about themselves that they say are important. Here's a quote. It gets brought back to words, the power to create. You are saying one thing and doing another. You say health is important to you, but you're allowing yourself to treat your body like it's not. That's a misalignment. I think she's absolutely correct. And this is something I tend to be guilty of as well. As I said, I can get busy and stop my self-care, and it's taken discipline and the making and correcting of mistakes and arguing with myself to overcome that. One of the tricks that I do is, when possible, I try to set my self-care up in such a way that there's some sort of accountability. There's a daily tracker in my bullet journal that I use to manage my tasks and reflection. And so every day I put marks beside the bullets for exercise, spiritual work, personal housework, and so on. And if I miss, well, I see that every time I look at the page, and it nags at me. When I was trying to get control of my physical self, I could never find a system of exercise that worked for me. I don't even know how many gym memberships I paid for and didn't use. But what did work is the martial arts. And that worked because I was accountable to my martial arts master. And after earning my first black belt, I was accountable to the class I was teaching, to show up and be able to do what I was assigned to teach. And if I got careless about that, everyone would know because my technique would become sloppy. I do my physical therapy exercises these days because I'm accountable to my physical therapist, who will let me know in no uncertain terms if I'm slipping. I maintain a rigorous spiritual life, in part because I make myself accountable to a spiritual director. I keep the saw sharp and have given others permission to call me on it if that saw starts to get dull. This has worked for me. So, how about you? What shape is your saw in? Are you eating well? How's your hydration? Are you keeping up with exercise? Getting enough sleep? Do you take enough breaks, vacations, naps, whatever? Do you pray or meditate? Do you do intentional reading? One of the world's most successful people, Warren Buffett, says he spends 80% of his working day reading. Is your continuing education current if you practice a profession like I do? And so on. Keep that saw sharp. You don't have time to neglect it. Hey, thank you for your time and attention today. I'll be back next week with a different talk on a different subject. It does help me if you let others know about my work, so please like, share, and subscribe. If I can be of help to you, please feel free to reach out through email, my website, or my Patreon channel. Stay well and stay safe.